If you want to know whether what a public figure is saying stacks up, you can take a look at the data. But what if the facts and figures aren't being collected as rigorously as they once were? And what if the numbers are wrong? Or they're not being published in a way that you can understand them?
The website of Stats New Zealand is almost impenetrable for an ordinary person to use, and the government statistician has stopped publishing the range of reports that they used to produce on economic, population and social issues.
That's not just any Joe Public voicing his opinion, it's the former New Zealand government statistician Len Cook. I'm Alexia Russell, and today on The Detail, why it's more important than ever to gather and publish good data, where it's falling down, and the big changes coming soon. The current head of Stats NZ, Colin Lynch, answers his predecessor later in the episode. But first, the podcast on the resurgence in COVID-19 deaths that my colleague Amanda Gillies did a couple of weeks ago that needed to be corrected and brought home how vital it is not just to get the numbers right, but to present them clearly.
I was at home on the Friday night. One News did it with Jack Tame to say,
with more than 50 people hospitalised in the last week and 19 deaths.
And I thought, holy hell. 3 News did a very similar story. Monday morning, Morning Report had done it.
The latest Health New Zealand figures show 50 hospitalisations and 19 deaths with the virus. That's in just the past week.
It was then on NZME, then on the Wednesday on News Talk ZB. So we're talking all the big media organisations did. 19 people dead and 50 hospitalisations. So we did it, the rise of it. COVID, obviously very divisive, closed the country, it divided communities, and so you want to get this right. And people are still interested in it. And so we used all those clips because they were out in the public domain. We had a look at the Ministry of Health. In fairness, it's a very complicated one to follow, but I had interviewed
the website
talking about, and we interviewed an epidemiologist about it. All is good. That afternoon, I get an email from the Ministry of Health, Te Whataora, saying, look, there's been a misinterpretation of those figures, and as a journalist, that's your heart-sinking moment, because these were really big figures on a topic that is so divisive that you do not want to get wrong. And I was like, holy heck. Instead of just replying by email, I picked up the phone and called him and said, what the hell? He was very good, and he said, look, I understand that these figures can be misinterpreted. And I'm like, well, that's a hell of a figure to misinterpret. So it turns out that 19, which everyone went from, was from the previous week, 19 deaths of people with COVID from the previous week was actually the previous year. And that is a big thing. So no 19 Kiwis had not died the previous week. So you go to this drop box on the site and you go to deaths, and it actually uses what we thought were the recent March dates, but they were only when they were recorded, not when they happened.
Te Whataora has now added an explainer to its website to reduce the risk of further misinterpretation, and has acknowledged the need for better quality in its public-facing information. But another colleague of mine, Newsroom Pro Editor Jonathan Milne, has been having his own battles to get accurate figures from government departments. He's been tracking oil tankers heading to New Zealand.
The importance of this is, when are they going to get here, and are we going to have the fuel in New Zealand at the right time? And of course the government's been at pains to assure us that there is no immediate supply threat. However, their own officials in MB have done them no favours whatsoever. There were initial accusations that MB had understated the problem, that they were saying that, don't worry, it's all going to be fine, when in fact we were going to run in fuel. I looked more closely and realised, in fact, the opposite was true. They'd actually overstated the problem. They had failed to recognise how much fuel was coming in and the rate at which it would arrive. This is probably a less bad problem than saying, run for the hills and being Jeremiah's. But the outcome of that is that business leaders, trucking companies, logistics firms we're sort of getting a bit panicked, and we're saying, "Oh no, we're going to run out of fuel." And they were starting to track the tankers themselves. I talked to a few of them, and they had they'd signed up for their little subscription so they could see the tankers coming. They were all trying to second guess the data because they got to the point where they didn't trust the MB data, and that's a really unfortunate place to be. I spent 6 days going back and forth on an almost hourly basis with MB, and I have to say, all credit to them, these guys were working 24/7. I had a briefing on a Saturday afternoon from three of them at one point. I was getting emails from them at 10 or 11 o'clock at night as they tried to sort out their data. But at the end of the day, there were fundamental internal contradictions in their data that they couldn't answer. And so they fell back on, well, we just used the best information we had from the fuel companies at the time, and it may have been overtaken by events now. It wasn't good enough. And it does matter because it is alarming for people, and everyone really, who is actually dependent on the arrival of fuel on our shores. What this was addition. It was simple addition. It was taking the volumes of fuel that on the boats that were coming in and adding them up. It shouldn't have been that complicated. It's frustrating, but it is more than just ship spotting. It's actually important because we need to know whether we can be confident the fuel is going to be here when we need it to be.
What other incidents have there been lately where the numbers have just been missing?
Well, I think one where they got it wrong was Stats New Zealand on their food price index. In their February data, they overstated the number as 2.5%. In fact, it was 2.1% as they confirmed the following month when they checked their data.
So this was just because a supermarket chain somewhere, the data from there was missed out?
Yeah, and I don't think it was the supermarket chain's fault. It appears to me that Stats NZ, an analyst in there, somehow have just managed to miss an entire column. And so there was about 2 weeks data from an entire supermarket chain missing from their calculations into how much food prices had gone up. And so it just threw everything out of kilter. We ended up with headlines across the media saying the price of chocolate blocks have doubled, which they hadn't.
Disaster.
I know, we can all empathise with that. We all read that story. But it hadn't happened. It was wrong. Now, this wasn't just problematic because it sort of gave us a misrepresentation of how expensive chocolate was. It was important because that figure in February came out the day before the Reserve Bank Monetary Policy Committee sat down together behind closed doors in a small room and discussed whether to raise interest rates. And the Monetary Policy Committee at the Reserve Bank takes an enormous range of data. And if you only have to read one of their monetary policy statements that they put out every few months to realise just the enormous, absolute swathe of the stuff there is. But food price inflation is just one small piece of data. But it was a very fresh piece of data. It was very new. It had come out just the day before. It was too late for them to include in their formal projections and forecasts that they published at the back of the monetary policy statement. But I'm told by Chief Economist Paul Conway at the Reserve Bank that they do take into account all data, including stuff that came in just the day before. And if I look at the monetary policy statement, the first paragraph referred to the price of food going up as a factor in their consideration. Now, as it turns out, I don't think it swayed the result on this occasion. I don't think we ended up with higher interest rates as a result of that overstated food price inflation figure. They held the interest rates at the same level. They didn't drop them. They didn't raise them. And it was always the expectation that they would hold them at that level. But
it does just go to show you how vital these pieces of information are.
It can be so borderline. And this was not the first time. Stats NZ had done the same thing with the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, a couple of years earlier. They'd overstated it by several points. And at some point, this is going to happen, and it's going to go through into the Reserve Bank figures, and suddenly you and I are going to be paying more on our mortgages and higher interest rates. Because the stats have gone through the wrong way. So this stuff does really matter.
Stats NZ is owning that mistake. Here's the current government statistician, Colin Lynch.
So the food price index error was for 1 month in January. We certainly endeavour to make no mistakes, and that's the ambition. Everything's 100% correct, and you need to put that in context of sort of 270 plus releases every year and hundreds of thousands of series. But for the food price index, we did get it wrong. I did what I think was right, which was to be transparent about it, to announce it, to put it right, which we did. And it didn't have any impact, nor would it have had any impact on the CPI or GDP or any other macro indicators. And I have a review underway so that we do completely understand what happened. And that was about a couple of weeks away from being completed. And that we actively learn the error and are really clear about the underlying causes, what we might need to change in our systems to ensure we don't repeat that mistake.
Because it's really super important, isn't it, for you guys to, like you say, be 100% correct all the time, to make no mistakes, because mistakes will diminish the faith in government agencies. Like in an era where no one trusts anyone, you guys need to be the rock.
Yeah, look, trust is at the centre of what everything I do and think about, and that's not just the release of statistics, but how we run the organisation. So I am very focused on trust and very focused on statistical quality assurance, so that we get it right every time. But I would rather not be having a conversation about an error. But when we do, we're very transparent about it and absolutely learn from it.
Has the 7% cut in your budget affected the quality of information gathering or the public distribution of statistics?
The short answer is no. Look, Stats New Zealand we're unapologetically focused on delivering value for money for New Zealanders, hence our focus on the census and using admin data. I'd acknowledge our headcount and budget has reduced in recent years, but look, I'm confident we have focused on having the right people in the right roles in the right places, so we continue to deliver high quality and trusted official statistics.
When I interviewed Paul Conway at the Reserve Bank, the chief economist, about the effect that the overstated food price index figure had, he pointed me to a speech he'd given 2 years earlier in which he warned about the dangers of getting the stats wrong and the importance of resourcing our statistics agencies well. He warned about that then. He sent a clear signal to the government. What did they do later that same year? They slashed 7% out of the baseline of Stats NZ, and Stats NZ ended up laying off, according to media reports at the time, 300 staff.
Gosh, and these are not just, when you say, it's just backroom people, the work these backroom people do is vital, right?
I don't think anyone anywhere really buys a distinction between backroom and front room anymore. Everyone has their role to play in an organisation, maybe of greater or lesser importance, but they're all part of what should be a finely functioning machine. I think what we're also seeing with stats departments, and this is a global thing, it's not just New Zealand, but they're coming under fire all over the world. We saw Trump sack his Bureau of Labour Statistics boss last year.
Why did you fire the head of the Bureau of Labour Statistics? Because I think her numbers were wrong.
She didn't give him the job because he wanted to hear, right?
Well, that was a popular interpretation. But they did actually get the data quite badly wrong. And they corrected it the following month. And that is what statistics agencies do. Across the other side of the Atlantic, the UK, the head of their stats departments also quit, also because of erroneous data. So this is a problem around the world. The data is becoming politicised, but it's also becoming harder to follow. You can't phone up people and ask them questions about their household income anymore because no one has landlines, and people are less likely to answer candidly. I think now there's a diminished trust in all kinds of public institutions, whether it's politics or government or media or statistics agencies, and so our statistics have become less and less reliable. And you see every month statistics departments around the world having to revise and correct their numbers from the previous month. And this is good practice. This is what they should be doing. And good statistics agencies are just candid and upfront about it and say, well, these are this month's revisions. It's more problematic where you've got, I think, agencies that aren't at the heart of statistics keeping, like MB and its fuel data, who see any criticism of their data as an affront to their integrity, and so they will fight to cover it up as best I can see, and that becomes really dangerous, because then that really exacerbates the problems with trust in statistics.
As well as trusting the statistics, people need to be able to understand them. That's a bugbear for Len Cook, who's been the top statistician in 2 countries, New Zealand from 1992 to 2000, and the UK for 5 years after that.
I think that government statisticians don't do enough work now to get their information out. The website of Stats New Zealand is almost impenetrable for an ordinary person to use, and the government statistician has stopped publishing the range of reports that they used to produce on economic, population and social issues.
Colin Lynch says website upgrades are on the way, and he points out there's been a major change in society since Len's days, and that's AI.
As the new government statistician, what I'm focused on is responding to the world we're in today, which is an increasingly complex world, an increasingly AI-led world. So my focus is on ensuring New Zealanders and others can get access to our information in that world. So with that in mind, we are rebuilding our website, because what we've discovered, and I'm sure like many others, more and more people are consuming our data through AI search or AI-related tools. We're seeing less individual visitors to our website, because we know that AI is the main source of information, or AI searches. And we'll have a new website by early next year. And we're also looking at all our data tools that are on that website are up to date and AI enabled. People will still be able to visit the website and get what they want directly, but we also need to make sure when people put a search for GDP in AI, they get high quality Statistics New Zealand official statistics.
There's another big change coming in data collection. The census, as we know it, is going. The Data and Statistics Census Amendment Bill, which has passed its first reading in Parliament, will abolish the 5-yearly count of every household in the country in favour of what they're calling an administrative data-first approach, boosted by a yearly sampling of around 5% of the population. Stats NZ's done a regulatory impact statement on this change, which includes warnings that it would mean some reductions in data accuracy, detail and coverage, especially initially for groups such as disabled people, rainbow communities and small ethnic communities. But it also points out that there's growing public resistance to complete census forms and rising costs. The 2023 census cost about $326 million to carry out.
What's changing is the way we collect the census. The data in the census is here to stay. And I'm quite sort of excited about the fact that we're going to move from having that most of that once every 5 years to by 2030 having that every year. And so that's a lot more data and a lot richer data for New Zealanders. And we're between now and 2030, we'll be sharing examples of the data and releasing data so people can see that as we develop it. There are communities that we need to work with to better understand their data needs and what they need and how we address their needs that might previously have been collected in a more traditional, as you said, knocking on the door census. But the reality is the world is changing around us. It's getting harder and harder to get people to fill out surveys. And that's not unique to New Zealand. It's a global phenomenon, and harder to fill out censuses. So we have to look at, using the data New Zealanders already give us to inform decision making. And that's part of this process.
Administrative data are the records that departments, particularly social welfare, health, education, police, justice, hold about individuals. And they are pulled together by an index of people that's held within Statistics New Zealand. It's not a publicly available index, but it is, however, a de facto population register. And so that means that Stats New Zealand can pull together everything that departments have managed to store and organise in a coherent way about the people they deal with. Obviously, some departments like tax are quite excellent at doing that. They cover everyone who's liable to pay tax They manage it very well because they want to get money off them. Other departments are fairly mixed. But the thing is, no one has ever organised any common standards across government for the management and classification of the records of government. Stats New Zealand do that as well as they can, but the issue that they have to replace a census is that those records that you have, for example, about you or me, relate to a whole series of events in the past. There isn't a way that government itself can snap its fingers and say, I want to know everything about Len Cook right now. I don't know his income right now because I've got his past income. I don't know about his health. We recorded that in the past. I don't know anything about his justice record. So there's nothing that is stored at the same time. They don't know about my family. When it comes to a census, we go to a household and we ask people, tell us today everything about your household. Who's in it, who would usually be in it, and who isn't. And so because of that simultaneity, we can gather information about families, about households, about different communities in a way that administrative data really can't. Administrative data it's a wee bit like an archaeologist or an anthropologist discovering shards of bones that relate to quite different time periods and trying to put them together without a skeleton. I think that's the difference with administrative records. In their fields, they give us rich information. So, for example, out of justice statistics, we can identify when did someone first come into the court area, at what age were people first imprisoned, for example. So we get very rich information on the difference of the ethnicity, of the gender of people, of different pathways through the justice system. We wouldn't get that as well from a census. It gives us the ability to, for example, make population projections about the future. We've got this sort of 100-year track of families, fertility, birth rates, family formation. And because of that long track, we're able to project into the future in all of the 70-odd local authorities in New Zealand what's going to be population change in New Zealand.
Right, so follow the line on the graph, essentially.
Yeah, we look ahead.
Yeah.
And we can see trends in fertility, trends in death rates. When it comes to family policy, for example, what's going on now with respect to family support, ministers the other day decided that they would change the income levels for people with particular forms of family support. They would have made the decision of which method to use based on information that comes out of the census family statistics and the other surveys, the household budget survey that derive from it. So it's that census gives us that really rich understanding of our society, and we can change the questions. For example, in the 1990s, we started introducing questions on disability that we'd never had before. In 1981, we started asking questions about smoking. So the census is one of the ways we know about what's going on about New Zealanders generally.
Without it, will it be easier for people to slip between the gaps?
Yes. I think the argument we always had with the census was, if you complete your census form, you become accountable to government for recognising your existence in its policies. And I think there's many, many communities that are quite small, that are not visible to government, or that government doesn't need to know about them. Well, don't forget that there's no reason why departments should collect information that are not related to their job. So we won't know, for example, about religion. And religion's becoming increasingly important in identifying the different migrant communities that we have. It's an important social indicator. We'll know less about people's different ethnic groups, and yet we're seeing massive shifts of intermarriage of different migrant groups. We'll lose the understanding the richness of those changes.
He's calling for an independent expert review on the proposed legislation. That's it for today. The Details a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. This episode was engineered by William Saunders and produced by Gwen McClure. Thanks to Colin Lynch, Jonathan Milne, Amanda Gillies and Len Cook. I'm Alexia Russell. Ka kite.